Dressed in a simple hoodie and baseball cap, Vin Diesel walked in unnoticed. He didn't want special treatment, no cameras, no VIP welcome. Tonight, he wasn't there as a celebrity. He was there as an observer. He took a quiet seat in the corner, scanning the restaurant. He had spent years building this place, ensuring that his team was treated well. But something felt off tonight. Then, through the noise, he heard it. A quiet, muffled sob. He turned his head toward the sound, his expression tightening. A young server stood near the kitchen entrance, her back slightly turned to the dining area. She wiped at her eyes quickly, trying to compose herself. She thought no one was watching, but Vin was. Something about the moment made him freeze. This wasn't just someone having a bad day. This was something deeper. His eyes followed as she took a deep breath, forced a smile, and went back to work like nothing had happened. Vin leaned forward in his seat, his jaw tightening. He needed to know what was going on, and he was about to find out. Her name was Emily. She had been working at Diesel's Prime for almost a year now. It wasn't her dream job, but it was a lifeline. The paycheck kept her mother's medical bills from piling up too high and helped cover rent for the small apartment she shared with her younger brother. Every shift mattered, every dollar counted. But tonight was too much. She had barely slept the night before, having spent hours at the hospital with her mother, who had taken a turn for the worse. Still, she had forced herself out of bed, put on her uniform, and showed up for work. Because calling out wasn't an option, missing a shift meant missing rent. Emily had done her best to push through, keeping her usual friendly smile in place. But then, a customer had snapped at her over a minor mistake, as if she wasn't even human. She had apologized, biting her tongue, swallowing her frustration. Then came another table, another rude remark. By the time she reached the kitchen, the weight of it all hit her. She had turned away, trying to catch her breath, but the emotions she had been holding in all day came rushing out. Tears slipped down her cheeks before she could stop them. She quickly wiped her face, knowing she couldn't afford to break down. Not here, not now. What she didn't know was that someone had been watching. From across the room, Vin Diesel saw everything, and something about it didn't sit right with him. He wasn't just going to ignore this. Vin Diesel had spent years in Hollywood, working on massive movie sets, surrounded by cameras, assistants, and security. But at his core, he had always been a man of the people. He never forgot where he came from. He knew what struggle looked like, and right now, he was watching it unfold right in front of him. From his quiet seat in the corner, he kept his eyes on Emily. She thought no one had noticed her wiping away those tears. But Vin had seen everything. The exhaustion in her face, the way she forced a smile as she returned to her tables, pretending nothing was wrong. How many times had she done this before? He could see it now, the way her uniform was slightly worn, her shoes scuffed from too many hours on her feet, the way she moved quickly, efficiently, yet with the weight of something heavier pressing down on her shoulders. This wasn't just a bad day. This was a bad life. Vin leaned back, crossing his arms. He didn't like what he was seeing. He watched as Emily approached a table, placing down drinks with a polite nod. The customers barely looked at her, too caught up in their own conversations. She was invisible to them, but not to Vin. His jaw clenched slightly. He built this restaurant to be different. His name was on the door, not just as a brand, but as a promise. A promise that the people who worked here would be treated with respect, that it wouldn't be just another job that drained the life out of its employees. And yet, here was Emily, crumbling under the weight of something he didn't fully understand yet. He exhaled slowly. It was time to find out the truth. Vin pulled his hood down slightly and adjusted his cap. He wanted to see how things played out, because before he stepped in, he needed to know exactly what kind of workplace this had become, and what he was about to witness would make his blood boil. Emily took a deep breath, steadying herself as she walked back into the bustling restaurant. She couldn't let them see her cry again. She had learned a long time ago that in places like this, emotions weren't welcome, only efficiency and a fake smile. She picked up a tray of plates, balancing them carefully as she moved between tables. "Just get through the shift," she told herself. "Hold it together." But before she could reach the kitchen, a sharp voice cut through the noise. "Emily, my office, now!" Her stomach twisted. The manager. She turned to see him standing near the bar, arms crossed, his expression hard. She knew that look. It meant trouble. She set down the tray and followed him through the restaurant, every step feeling heavier than the last. Vin Diesel, still seated in the corner, watched as they disappeared into the back. His grip on the table tightened. Inside the cramped office, the manager shut the door behind her. "What the hell was that?" he snapped. Emily flinched. "What? You think I didn't see you? Crying in the middle of the shift?" He scoffed. "Do you know how bad that looks? Customers don't come here to see miserable waitresses. If you can't keep your emotions in check, maybe this isn't the place for you." Emily's throat tightened. She wanted to explain, wanted to say that she was doing her best, that she was exhausted, that her mother was sick and she was barely holding on. But she knew it wouldn't matter. It never did. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, staring at the floor. The manager sighed dramatically. "Look, I get it. Life's tough, but guess what? It's tough for everyone. And I can't have you bringing the mood down. If this happens again, I'm cutting your hours. Got it?" Emily swallowed hard and nodded. "Good. Now get back to work." She turned to leave, her face burning with shame. What she didn't know was that Vin Diesel had just heard every word. And when she walked out of that office, everything was about to change. Emily stepped out of the manager's office, her face flushed, her hands clenched into fists. She felt small, humiliated, but she forced herself to keep moving. She couldn't afford to lose this job. She took another deep breath, wiped her eyes one last time, and headed toward the dining area, trying to act like nothing had happened. But then she stopped. The restaurant had gone eerily quiet. People weren't eating, weren't chatting like before. They were staring. Emily followed their gaze, and her heart nearly stopped. Standing in the middle of the restaurant, his hoodie now pulled back, his baseball cap tucked into his hand, was Vin Diesel. Her boss, her celebrity boss. She had seen him in movies, heard his voice in interviews, even glanced at his framed pictures on the restaurant walls, but never, not once, did she expect to see him here, in the flesh. And right now, he was looking straight at her. Emily's breath caught. Vin's face was unreadable, but his eyes, they burned with intensity. Then, slowly, he turned his head toward the manager, who was still standing near the office door, his face pale. The silence was crushing. Vin took a step forward, then another. His boots echoed against the tiled floor. The manager stiffened, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed. Everyone knew what was coming. Vin stopped a few feet away from Emily, his deep voice cutting through the silence. "Are you okay?" Emily blinked, struggling to find her voice. No one had ever asked her that before. Her lips parted, but no words came. She just nodded weakly. Vin glanced back at the manager. His expression hardened. "Funny," he muttered, tilting his head, "because I just heard you threatening to cut her hours." The manager paled further. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Vin didn't need to yell. He didn't need to say much at all. The weight of his presence alone was enough to make the entire room feel smaller. The entire restaurant held its breath. Because everyone knew this wasn't just another night at Diesel's prime. Something big was about to happen. The manager's face drained of color. He had been caught. The same man he had just dismissed, the same employee he had belittled, was now standing under the direct protection of the restaurant's owner, and not just any owner, Vin Diesel. The weight of the moment pressed down on him. Customers were watching, employees were watching. Even the kitchen staff had peeked out to see what was happening. There was no escaping this. He forced a nervous chuckle, straightening his posture. "Mr. Diesel, wow, I wasn't expecting you tonight." He rubbed his hands together, trying to compose himself. "This is all just a misunderstanding. You know how it is. Sometimes employees need a little tough love." Vin didn't blink. His jaw tightened, his broad shoulders squared. Tough love? That's what this guy was calling it? His voice, though quiet, carried across the room. "So, belittling your staff? That's how you run my restaurant?" The manager swallowed. "No, of course not. I was just trying to keep things professional, you know." He threw a glance at Emily, as if expecting her to back him up. She didn't. Instead, she stood frozen, watching Vin Diesel defend her, something no one had ever done before. Vin sighed, shaking his head. "I built this place to be different." He looked around the restaurant, his voice calm but firm. "Not just another job that drains people. A place where employees are respected." He turned back to the manager, his expression unreadable. "And what I just saw, that's not respect." The tension in the room was unbearable. Would he fire the manager on the spot? Tear into him right here in front of everyone? Instead, Vin did something no one expected. He looked at Emily. "I want to hear it from you." Emily's breath hitched. He was giving her a voice. She swallowed hard. "I love working here," she admitted, her voice shaky but strong. "But I'm tired. I'm struggling. And tonight, I just needed a moment, that's all." Vin nodded, listening carefully. Then he looked at the manager. "That moment? You should have given it to her." The manager had no response. He had already lost. And in that moment, everyone in the restaurant knew it. The restaurant was silent, all eyes locked on Vin Diesel. No one dared to speak. The manager stood stiffly, shifting from one foot to the other, clearly waiting for the inevitable. Would Vin fire him on the spot? Call him out in front of everyone? But what happened next took everyone by surprise. Vin exhaled slowly, then turned to Emily. "How long have you worked here?" She hesitated. "Almost a year." He nodded. "And in that time, has anyone ever asked how you're doing?" Emily's throat tightened. No one had. Not her manager, not her co-workers, not even customers. She had always been expected to push through, to smile no matter what. Her voice came out in a whisper. "No." Vin's expression darkened for a moment, then softened. He turned back to the manager. "That's the problem." The manager tensed. "Sir, Vin lifted a hand. "I'm not firing you." The manager's mouth snapped shut. He looked shocked, as did the staff. "But I am making some changes." Vin turned back to Emily, his voice steady. "Starting with you." Emily's breath caught. "From now on, you're getting a raise." A gasp rippled through the staff. "And," Vin continued, "I'm giving you fully paid time off to take care of whatever you need." Emily's hands flew to her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes, not from sadness, but from disbelief. The staff erupted into applause. Even the customers, who had been frozen in their seats, joined in. Emily looked up at Vin, her voice shaking. "I don't know what to say." He smiled. "Just promise me one thing." She nodded quickly. "Anything." "When you see someone else struggling, pay it forward." Emily wiped her tears and smiled. "I will." And just like that, her life had changed forever. Emily stood frozen, her mind racing to catch up with what had just happened. A raise, paid time off, from Vin Diesel himself. The applause still echoed through the restaurant, but to her it all felt distant, like a dream she hadn't woken up from yet. Vin placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Take care of yourself, okay?" Emily nodded, still too overwhelmed to speak. For the first time in a long time, she felt seen. Truly seen. Across the room, the manager stood awkwardly, shifting on his feet. He wasn't off the hook yet. Vin turned to him, his expression firm but calm. "You've got a second chance here," he said. "Use it. Start treating your staff with the respect they deserve." The manager swallowed hard and nodded. "Yes, sir." The message was clear. This wasn't just about Emily. It was about everyone in that restaurant who had ever felt undervalued, overworked, or unseen. The energy in the room had shifted. Employees stood a little taller. Customers looked at the staff with a new sense of appreciation. Emily wiped her eyes, finally letting out a small, shaky laugh. "I was just trying to make it through my shift," she murmured. "I never expected any of this." Vin chuckled. "Life has a funny way of surprising you." She looked up at him, finally finding her voice. "Thank you." Vin nodded. "You earned it." And with that, a single act of kindness had rewritten her future. The news of what happened at Diesel's Prime spread quickly. Customers shared the story, employees whispered about it, and soon social media took over. People weren't just talking about Vin Diesel's visit, they were talking about his message, about the way he stood up for someone who had been overlooked, about the importance of kindness in the workplace. Emily's life had changed in an instant, not just because of the raise or the paid time off, but because someone had finally seen her. She returned to work a week later, but something was different. Her co-workers treated her with more respect. Even the manager, now humbled, made an effort to be better. One moment of recognition, one act of kindness. That's all it took to shift the energy of an entire place. As for Vin Diesel, he never wanted attention for what he did. He didn't do it for headlines or praise. He did it because it was the right thing to do. And as he left the restaurant that night, pulling his hoodie back over his head, he couldn't help but smile. Sometimes the most important moments in life happen when no one is watching. And when they do, that's when true character is revealed.